Yo, what is going on, everybody on the internet? Today, I wanted to talk about 5 concepts of wealth building and investing, and some difficult questions that we should be asking ourselves as we start engaging in wealth building tools. As a friendly reminder, none of this is investment advice. Always seek professional guidance where appropriate. So, these are just kind of my takes on these topics, and frankly, each of them could probably have their own video. Some are probably more important than others. Now, when I think about the first uncomfortable, challenging question we must ask ourselves is, are you a trader or are you an investor? When I think about a trader, it's generally someone who's a little bit more short term focused and very active in, well, trading very frequently, right? And there's a lot of people out there that actually do make money off trading. But these are folks that are generally, they've been in the business for a really long time. They have a really, really precise executional discipline and very, very, I'd say, apathetic, if you will, to the emotions on a given day. And that can be very, very challenging for younger folks who are either just starting on their wealth building journey or think that they may be a little bit too confident, if you will. And I think that sometimes can bite people in the butt. So that's how I personally see traders. Now, when I think about an investor, I'm thinking about someone who's a little bit more long-term focused. They have longer-term goals, and they're predominantly focused on not picking winners. So for me personally, I am a big believer in the long-term success of the US economy. So a lot of my contributions go to surprise low-cost index funds. But again, when we think about these index funds and ETFs, right, really what we're buying, right, is the long-term success of the US economy. If you're buying VTI or VU, you're buying companies that make up a huge slice of the US economy. So over the course of our lifetimes, it's probably going to grow. Now, that's not to say that challenges won't arise, right? But when you're buying into these ETFs, these index funds, you're really buying a very diverse set of companies that have data that has proven over time to grow. So it's a little bit more of a delayed gratification angle, which I personally am a big fan of. But I think it's very important that we sit with this trader versus investor question and honestly have that conversation with ourselves about what we're really looking to do. Now, jumping into number 2 here, this is more of a classical investor debate, if you will, but it's the concept of growth versus value. And when we think about this, it's kind of a bit of a how do you pick what you buy scenario. So when I think about growth investing, right, I think about companies that have potential to grow in the future. And that might sound very straightforward, but we think about names like NVIDIA. But if I were to pick a crazy example, I would say like a company like CoreWeave, right? Those NeoCloud companies, those crazy AI adjacent infrastructure, those are the companies that are those hyperscaler growth contributors, right? But they're also very risky. The key with growth names, though, is really that they're companies that have a lot of room to run, that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, there's a pretty good chance they're still going to be around and they're still going to be rapidly on that growth trajectory. So that's kind of the way to think about it. Now, oftentimes when I think about value investing, it's kind of buying companies that are underpriced relative to what they are actually worth. Now, there's a little bit of a difference right there when we think about buying the dip or buying something on sale, but think of it more as a boring, profitable, cash generating business like a Coca-Cola or a McDonald's or a Johnson & Johnson. Like those, will always kind of be there companies, but they're not going out there and trying to cure cancer, right? To use a crazy analogy here. So why does it even really matter in the first place? I think if you're young, you're just starting off out on your investing journey, it's good to probably be more growth focused and still appreciative of the value companies that exist out there. But ultimately, you want to try to put yourself in the best possible position to grow your wealth for as long as a time period as you can, right? So it's maybe a little bit more uncomfortable, maybe, but ultimately you could potentially have bigger returns over the course of your lifetime. All right, jumping into number 3 here, and I think this is a really important one, but it's your general risk tolerance. It's understanding that when things go wrong in the economy and the world, and you see massive sell-offs and massive dips, and it will happen in our lifetimes, how do you respond to that? How much are you willing to stomach, if you will? So it really comes down to not panic selling, weathering the storm, being okay to sit with that uncertainty. And, it's easy on great days to see a nice gain, right? That feels great, but it feels even worse when you're down 20, 30% and it's like, ugh, this sucks, right? Feels like your hard work isn't paying off. But ultimately, it is something that we have to be a little bit okay with, because no matter how you choose to invest, bad things are going to happen. And it's part of living on planet Earth. Now, jumping into number 4 here, and it's honestly a pretty simple question, but I think it's also very nuanced. And it's, what's your time horizon, right? How long do you really want to stay invested? And I think that's something that when we're young, right, time is our most valuable asset. It can turn small amounts of money into very large sums of money over the course of our lifetime. Any CAGR compounding interest calculator out there will tell you that. But I always think about how I want to have a plan every 5, 10, 15, 20 years to be thinking about my investments and how I can tweak them as I get older and evolve through life, and how I might want to do something with that money, which is a perfect segue into my 5th point, which is why the hell are you even doing it in the first place? Now, when we think about investing, we're building towards something at the end of the day, and whether that's for a future home one day, or maybe to pay for your own education or your children's education, or something that's going to require a large amount of money, or even maybe to pass it on. There's a million reasons, I'm sure, as to why anyone might invest, but it's important to be asking yourselves these questions, especially as the ebbs and flows of life come about. I think having the power to be able to leave a toxic, terrible job because you happen to have 500,000 hanging out in your brokerage account is a pretty good safety net. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be selling that stuff, but it takes the pressure off just a little bit to make those stressful moments in your life just that much easier. And I think the power of money isn't necessarily increasing the number. Yeah, all right, I guess it kind of is, but flame me in the comments for that later. But it's about unlocking the next thing that you want to do with your life, right? And I think that's a very important reason as to why having really great systems and understanding how you think about investing is probably the most important decision you can make. And personally, it's fantastic to have optionality in life. Now, I'm not going to say that these are the only five things you should think about, but they're the concepts that I've thought a lot about as I've been on my own wealth building journey and investing and building systems around my own cash and investments. And I think it's something that if you're just starting out, you're young, maybe you're somewhere along the way and have some things invested. I think these are just important considerations to always be asking yourselves and thinking about how you want your portfolio to change over your life. And, at the end of the day, it is just money, but it can unlock so much more optionality for you. So, would love to hear about how y'all think about your own portfolios and kind of your own tension points as you've gone about your own wealth building journeys. And we'll hope to continue the discussion next time.